and welcome to Encounter. This is a personality program of the Imo Broadcasting Corporation, Orient Television, designed to bring you notable personalities in the country and their achievements. We are transmitting on Start Time channel 113 and then on UHF channel 59. Today, I have a wonderful personality as my guest today. A writer, a publisher, a scholar, activist, and long-serving executive director of the US-based African Writers Endowment. He is the author of 8 books and a publisher and editor of over 100 books by African writers, artists, and leaders. A literary giant who has over 25 years of public administration experience in the United States of America and over 30 years of leadership in community organizing. His areas of expertise are in human capital development, educational administration, homeland security, intelligence analysis, strategic planning, and communication. He holds a doctorate degree in educational administration and leadership from Rutgers University, New Jersey, a master's degree in homeland security from George Washington University, Washington, D.C., another master's degree in counseling and human resource management from the College of New Jersey, and 2 bachelor's degrees in biology and psychology, also from the college in New Jersey. Back home, he is a chieftain of All Progressive Congress, APC, at Lodge Ward, Abombise. He holds 2 traditional chieftaincy titles, Obezobodombise and Idemota Lodge. My guest is no other person than Dr. Ugorji O. Ugorji. Dr. Ugorji, you're welcome to Encounter.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Good evening, viewers.
With me to encounter this literary giant are 2 notable journalists in the state. From my left is the IBC Assembly correspondent, Mr. Felix Odense.
My viewer, you're welcome.
And then from my right is another journalist from National Horn newspaper, Mr. Destiny Isenwa.
Thank you very much for being here.
Now, Dr. Ugorji,
So,
you are the executive director of the US-based African Writers Endowment.
yes, sir.
And then for the interest of our local viewers here and international, what is African Writers Endowment all about?
Thank you very much. The African Writers Endowment was established in 2000 in the U.S. Professor Chinua Achebe, may his soul rest in peace, was our chairman of that endowment. The endowment was set up, 1, to bring attention to the works of African writers in general. 2, to provide some tutorial or some training for up-and-coming and new writers from the African world. And then to hold seminars and conferences during which we honor African writers and their works, and we also honor some leaders from the African continent and from the African American community. So in the past, we've held conferences that feature Professor Chinua Achebe of late memory, Vice President Atiku of Nigeria, ambassadors from South Africa and Kenya, and in terms of political leaders here, we've had people like Kenan Namani, Kayode, that is Kayode Fayemi, the governor of Ekiti, and Governor Amechi of Rivers State.
You know, you mentioned Professor Chinua Achebe.
Yes.
Of course, he is literature personified.
Correct.
And I remember his wonderful book,
Things Fall Apart.
Things Fall Apart, Man of the People, and then all whatnot. How do you assess in your circle?
Well, Chinua Achebe is in a class of his own when it comes to African literature. He's synonymous with African writing. He redefined for the world storytelling from an African perspective. So the greatest honor of my life in the literary endeavor was when he accepted to chair the African Writers Endowment, which I founded, and when he accepted to be honored by the African Writers Endowment in Princeton, New Jersey, which I also hosted.
All right, another question is that in as much as you say that the endowment is made up of training upcoming writers and also organizing for seminars, you mentioned some people you people have also welcomed or hosted. Are they being hosted here in Africa or they're in overseas?
No, it's a US-based entity. So yes, it's all, virtually all our events are held in the state of New Jersey where the organization is incorporated and situated.
So the African writers, the upcoming African writers should be from US, not here in Africa?
Well, we do provide access to our website from which writers from all over the world can get strategic input in terms of their work or development of their craft. We also do provide grants, and we have done so with some writers from the continent not based in the US. In other words, we provide grants to writers whose work are meritorious but are having difficulty getting published. So what we do is that if we find a work that is in that category, we talk with a couple of publishers that are associated with the endowment and see if we can subsidize the publication of the work to enable the work come to light. So we've done that with writers that are directly from the continent and also writers that are based in the US.
Can you mention some of the writers from the continent?
Well, one of them is Philip Effiong, the son of the late General Philip Effiong. The memoirs of his father, which is on Biafra. As you know, the late General Philip Effiong was the last head of state of Biafra before the surrender of Biafra. So his memoirs lay fallow for a long time without being published. We came in, the African Writers Endowment provided a subsidy, so to speak, to enable that work to come out.
Okay, let me ask you, as a literary giant, what are your major works?
My, excuse me, my major works, okay, it includes on the academic side, I have two works that are in the security realm. One is titled Resource Control, the Mother of Empires, Independent Movements, and Terrorism. There's a second one on Securing the Homeland, which is a collection of essays on security leadership and intelligence analysis. On the literary side, my first book of poems is coming out this month in Nigeria. It's going to be published by Goldline and Jacobs, as well as Bluesland Communications Limited. Those entities are based here in Nigeria. It's a collection of poems that I've written over the years, and this is my first one that is coming out. Now, beyond that, I've written Sunrise Daughters, which is a profile of Igbo women, a global profile of Igbo women. I've written Tall Drums, Portraits of Nigerians Who Are Changing America. I've also written From the Belly of the Gods, which is probably one of the ones that's most dear to me because it is currently being worked on as a movie in Nollywood by some actors and producers in Nollywood. Then I have a collection of folk tales that was titled The Adventures of Torty Tales from West Africa. And then there is another work called The Crow Bride and Other Torty Tales. Those are some of my writings. Then I have two children's books. One is titled I Saw the Sky Fall. The other one is titled Chima, which is a narration of the African or Igbo origins of the Santa Claus legend.
Okay, let me come in once again. Having that all this potential in you, how do you intend to bring it down to the grassroots to ensure that those on at the local level, there are some talent wasting over here? How do you intend to make people within this environment to benefit from the potential God has given to you?
Okay, one of the things I've done, and I just did it as I came on this particular trip, I just joined the Association of Nigerian Authors, the Owerri branch of it. So we intend to collaborate with the Association of Nigerian Authors, first of all, to put up conferences here in Nigeria, and two, to get into the area you're talking about, which is helping groom new and upcoming writers.
All right, another aspect we want you to know is that, like your book that is entitled Resource Control, the Mother of Empire, Independence Movement and Terrorism, what motivated you to write the book, and how will you assess resource control in Nigeria?
Well, in the book, I posit, which is sort of a seminal or new argument, that the real reason why you have attempts by nation states to build empires, and the real reason why you have independent movements over the years, both in Africa and in Latin America, and the reason now you see terrorism becoming a global phenomenon is all about resource control. People will tell you that there are religious reasons that folks are fighting, and there are economic reasons why some people are fighting. But I do contend that the primary reason you have terrorism, you have empire building by nations such as Britain, France, and to a lesser degree the Americas, and then that you have independent movements that sprung up over the years within Nnamdi Azikiwe, Robert Mugabe, and others, all boil down to resource control. Resource control, the major resource that people tend to fight over is land. That's the number one resource. Everything else resides in land. Whatever else you find in terms of minerals reside on land. But I say that the most important resource is human resource. So you find that in empire building, in independence movements, and even in terrorism, it is the human resource, control of human resource. And by then I mean control of the mindsets of the individuals in a particular locale, is the main ingredient that fuels empire building, independent movements, and terrorism.
Now in Nigeria, the resource control, we're talking about especially the minerals, waters, and that this petroleum. How do you assess resource control in Nigeria?
I'm assuming by that question you are relating it to also the issue of terrorism, perhaps, in Nigeria. Is that correct, or is that a different question?
It's a different one.
Resource control. Well, resource control is a state policy issue. It's by and large an agreement or a policy statement about how the nation state, in this case Nigeria, and the constituent bodies within the nation state, in this case we're talking essentially now of the states. It used to be the regions, but now it is the 36 states. And then the local government. So resource control is about how these three tiers of government agree to share the resources of the country. So that's what resource control essentially boils down to in the Nigerian theater. Is there anything else you want me to?
It's not asking you, how do you see that? Is it obtainable, or should we still implement such a policy to make our country thrive?
Well, there is resource control in Nigeria. The question is who is controlling the resources. There is indeed resource control. What we have now, which was a little different in the 60s, is that the federal government now controls the lion's share of resources, right? That's the issue. The states and the various regions think that there is a great imbalance in that control issue, and that the states and even the local communities need to be given more stake in the control of the resources that emanate from where they find themselves. All right, so that's what the issue is. But there is resource control. The question is to what degree are the constituent bodies sharing in an equitable way in a way that allows for peace and development, because you can't have development without peace. You can't have peace without justice. And justice essentially gets to this issue of sharing. How do the constituent bodies within the nation get to share in the what is known as the common patrimony of the people?
Oh, okay.
So, so in this, what I've just said now, petroleum, for instance,
Right.
is found in Niger Delta.
Correct.
Coal is found in Enugu.
Correct.
And then these things are controlled by the federal government. But we also have gold in this country from Zamfara State and other states. They are not controlled by the federal government. How do you see this?
Well, I'm going to assume that the premise of your question is accurate. That is that gold and other resources
Yes.
are not controlled by the federal government. But I do know that licensing for gold procurement for mining, which includes gold mining, is you have to get the license from the federal government. I believe that's the case. I may be wrong. To the extent that the federal government is the entity that is giving license to mine gold oil, then there is indeed to some degree a federal control of that. But besides that, if you assume that petroleum and coal are controlled by the federal government, but gold and other mineral resources that you find elsewhere, say in the north, are not controlled by the federal government, then it becomes a matter of state policy. And state policy is derived by the executive branch, and to the extent that the legislative branch is okay with the policy, then that's the policy. So if you want to change the policy, first, you get an executive president or a president who is sympathetic to changing the policy, or you get your representatives in the Senate or the House of Representatives to now have an inclusive list or an extensive list that includes all mineral resources, where every resource that is identifiable is treated the same way.
It's controlled by the federal government.
Right.
What is entrenched in the Constitution.
Right.
This is quite different from what we're seeing now.
Right. So again, that can be addressed or redressed by the representatives of the people who are in parliament and those in the corridors of power in the executive branch to look into that. And where anybody feels that he or she is not getting the results they want relative to that issue from either the executive or the legislative branch, and to the extent that someone has local standing to sue, then you go to the judiciary and have them adjudicate that.
All right. You said that resource control has something to do with human resource control.
Correct.
And in that book you said independent movements
Correct.
and terrorism. What called for these things? I mean, more especially terrorism.
Okay, well, terrorism, independence movements, and empire building are all human-made. They are caused by the human ambition to either control a particular region or to expand one's influence or a group of people's influence around the world.
Yeah.
So you find the British Empire went all over the world, and at one point it was said that the sun does not set on the British Empire because it was all over the world. As small an island nation as it is, it had tremendous influence all over the world. France had the same, and the Americans to some degree, but not as much. The Americans did not pursue empire as much as the European nations did. So it is human ambition, it is group ambition that fuels empire building. It is also human ambition that says to a group of people who feel subjugated that they want independence, they want self-determination. So they want control of their lives, whether it be political, environmental, economical, or otherwise. So that also fuels independence movement. Now, terrorism. It is important to understand what terrorism is and what it is not. Now, Boko Haram is a non-state actor. We know that. It is not funded or organized by the Nigerian state. So it meets one of the criterion for being designated that Boko Haram uses violence or the threat of violence in its activities. And then Boko Haram has a political goal. The political goal is the establishment of a caliphate. A caliphate is another term for empire. All right. So in those, with those three criteria, Boko Haram fits the definition of a terrorist organization. It is also international in nature, so it goes beyond the boundaries of Nigeria and has connections and relationships and sponsorships and funding from outside Nigeria. That is an established fact. The herdsmen do not want, have not declared war on the Nigerian state, to the best of my knowledge. They have not declared that they have a political goal. In other words, they want a nation of their own, a caliphate of their own, or something to that effect. So what you find happening is an encounter, albeit violent at times, between a set of people and other, in this case, indigenous people where they have come and made some incursions into, that appears to be a fight and a battle to obtain land for their own existence and for their own activities. You understand? So that's what you see happening with respect to the herdsmen. It is violent, no doubt about it, and the state, to the extent that the state is not.
Is this action of terrorism and the herdsmen activities, is it another part of empire activity? Can you see? Do you see it that way?
You can say that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So to a large extent, to the extent that Boko Haram succeeds in establishing a caliphate, and that caliphate operates on principles and value systems that originate from Arabia, then there is an extension of a particular type of influence of Arabia in those areas where Boko Haram has established control. The same thing can be said about, say, the British Empire. To the extent that the British or the French or anybody else goes into foreign lands, captures those lands, and begins to administer those lands, and begin to, in the civil service and other areas, begin to institute value systems and processes that are European in nature. Again, it's the same concept. But the bottom line is freedom. People want to be free to worship as they choose, to assemble as they choose, to move around and associate with people as they choose, and to have self-determination as well.
Okay.
Doc, the activities of Boko Haram
Yes.
has displaced some families and made them destitute.
Correct.
Some of them are in displaced places. And now, some of the captured Boko Haram, they call them repentant Boko Haram.
Yeah.
They have been given amnesty. And they want to send them abroad for rehabilitation or whatever. Yet, the people they displaced are destitute. Nothing is happening to them. Nothing is being said about them. So how will you reconcile this issue?
Okay. Again, first of all, don't reconcile anything because I'm not in the position. I'm not in the position to administer the homeland security policies of the nation. But let me get to what you're saying. There are two aspects to what you're saying, which is how do you stop and end the activities of terrorist organizations? And I posit that all terrorist organizations are rational actors, meaning they can be negotiated with. They're all rational. They're not just doing things that are crazy with no goal in mind. So because they are all rational actors, the organized ones among them, then they can be dialogued with. Again, what I say is that the issue is resource control. Once you identify what the resource is, you can get to a table and discuss how you share it in a way that prevents or preempts terrorism or terroristic acts. The same thing in the Niger Delta, right? There was amnesty granted to the militants in the Niger Delta. Why? Because government was pursuing a policy of trying to end the violence, first of all. Now you get to, and how you end the violence is you discourage the participants in the violence to stop, or you encourage them to come back to the fold, so to speak, come back to the nation state and begin to act in the interest of the nation state. So you do a carrot and stick approach. The carrot is you provide trainings, you provide offers to go get the skills they need to do something else other than terrorism. And then you have a stick also, meaning if there are folks who don't want to dialogue and don't want to accept amnesty, then the entire force of the state is brought to bear on them to stop the activity. That's one. Now, clearly in those activities, there are affected populations. I think that's the other part of what you're talking about. I do not agree that they are not being addressed. They may not be addressed effectively. You talked about there is a displaced camps and all of that stuff. There are efforts to relocate people, to provide some fundamental sustenance issues for those that are affected. You and I may agree that the effort is not grandiose enough or effective enough, but they are not being ignored totally, nor are our brothers and sisters in the Niger Delta also being ignored. All the amnesty programs is all designed for two things: to end the violent activity and to somehow provide for succor to those affected and allow for infrastructural development in those areas.
Dear viewer, you are just joining us. You are watching Encounter, IBC personality program, and our guest today is a literary giant, an accomplished author, a wonderful security expert, Dr. Ugorji O. Dr. Ugorji, thank you for coming again. Let's continue.
Okay.
Dr. Ugorji,
Yes,
it seems we are talking much more on security, which you are an expert too. All right.
Okay.
And if you look at what we are saying concerning the security, you said that Boko Haram has an influence from Arabia. That means they are being motivated by some forces out there.
Correct.
So in as much as we know that Boko Haram has such power behind them, is something applicable to herdsmen and even these our own IPOB and all that and all that?
So yes, there are foreign backers for Boko Haram. We know that. Osama bin Laden, for instance, was one of the financial backers of Boko Haram, all the way from Afghanistan. We know that for a fact. The herdsmen, again, I will deal with facts that I know, both in the public domain and in security reports. I don't know any documentation that the herdsmen have foreign help. If you do, point for me. I don't know. There are suggestions that some of them are migrating from foreign lands and are joining, I guess, their brethren in Nigeria to again fight for this issue of land and occupation.
Okay, Doc, let me take a very different look at what we are discussing today.
Yes, sir.
You are a chief nurse of All Progressive Congress, that's APC.
Yes, sir.
And we have read that the APC is in the leadership of the nation today.
Correct.
Now, we have had a past administration by various presidents as the presidents before the arrival of President Muhammad Buhari.
Correct.
And we are also aware that Boko Haram have been existent before now.
Correct.
But would you agree to the view that the activities of Boko Haram got enhanced in the administration of the present government of Buhari?
No, I disagree. I would even posit that in terms of strategic strength of Boko Haram, the Muhammadu Buhari administration had weakened the strategic strength. It has not destroyed Boko Haram completely, but in terms of its strategic strength, forming a caliphate, these guys were controlling certain segments of northern Nigeria, collecting taxes from indigents and essentially ruling the place. All right? I can assure you that the PNB administration has dismantled that. So what you now have is a scattering of Boko Haram in forests, and they make incursions every now and then, but their strategic organization within the Nigerian state has been weakened by the Buhari administration. That's what I would say about that.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. Now, in the recent time, or still in this present administration,
Right.
the IPOB group was described as one of the terrorist groups.
Right.
Whereas we also have the Boko Haram on duty. What is the best description when it comes to comparison of IPOB and the Boko Haram activity?
There are two IPOBs. I don't know if you know.
You may educate us.
As a security
Yes.
expert, yeah.
Yes.
There are two IPOBs. The real IPOB is controlled by a collection of elders that included the late Dr. Ikedife and others. That's the real IPOB.
I'm just hearing this.
And their method of pursuing whatever their stated goals are, which is basically self-determination, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. Their method is to go through the court system, through the judiciary. That's the method of the real,
IPOB.
the original IPOB. There is a second offshoot of IPOB, a more militant offshoot of IPOB that found leadership in a brother called Akwannamdi, right? That's his name?
We have Wazirike, we have Ndekaro. Which one is that?
Wazirike is not IPOB.
All right.
Okay, is he part of the IPOB?
No.
Not the real
No, that's a different entity. Mazob is a different entity.
All right, all right.
And if you want to talk about that, we'll talk about that too. But Mazob is a different entity. But IPOB, there are two segments of IPOB.
We can understand that.
Okay, so the more militant aspect of IPOB, which is not strange because in every movement, especially independence movement, there are more conservative elements of the movement, and then there are more militant elements of the movement. So the more militant IPOB has found leadership in Kano. It is in fact the militant faction of IPOB that has attracted the Nigerian nation state to the point where it has classified it as a terrorist organization. But that classification, again, you go back to the original analysis or criteria for classification. Is IPOB a non-state actor? You know, yes. It is a non-state actor to the extent that you believe that, okay, it is a non-state actor. Let's leave that at that. The second one is, does it have, is it pursuing its goals by violence or threat of violence?
All right.
That's where things get murky. And I know there is a general belief that IPOB is nonviolent. There's a general belief in that. Let's keep that part for now and deal with the issue of political goal. The IPOB, the militant part of IPOB, clearly has a political goal. It wants an independent nation of Biafra. That's a clear statement of a political goal. Now let's get back to the third one, which is the issue of the use of violence or the threat of the use of violence. Right?
Yeah.
Do they meet that criteria? I will say this to you. Official IPOB, whether militant or not, claims to be nonviolent. That's their official posture.
Yeah.
Correct?
Ideology.
Okay. They claim to be nonviolent. But the question then is, in their activities, some of which are in video, including their leader, and statements made by their leader, at certain points, right? Their activities, are they violent, or do they have the threat of violence? For instance, when they call for a boycott of something, or stay at home, do they seek to enforce it by force of any nature? That's the question you have to ask yourself. Because that's a political strategy to call for boycott, right? So do they seek to enforce the boycott by violence or threat of violence? If you answer that question, then you will come to understand whether IPOB, at least the militant part of it, is terroristic in its efforts or not.
So, Doc, what are the effects of this infighting, the Fulani herdsmen, the Boko Haram, and the IPOB advancement on the unity of Nigeria?
Well, it's negative, no doubt about that. To the extent that unity is desired and that unity is purposeful, then the operations, activities of these groups do not bode well for the unity of Nigeria. And I would say to you, every nation state has activities that threaten the unity of the state. Even in America, as established as it is, there are still some voices out there right now that, if you leave them alone to their devices, are willing to go on civil war of some sorts with respect to white supremacy attitudes and beliefs. So every nation, Nigeria is not unique in the challenges it faces. Some of our challenges, particularly Boko Haram, has metamorphosed into a stage where it has become more difficult to dislodge it. All right, but the efforts of the Nigerian state should be, if you believe, whether you call them terrorists or not, if you believe they are rational actors, which I believe they are all rational actors, then rational actors can get to the table and discuss how we control the resources, which I posit is the main issue, right? How we control the resources in a manner that is equitable, or at least that there is a perception of justice in that control and sharing of the resources.
Okay, I like the title of this your book, Sunrise Daughters, a global portrait of Igbo women.
Mm-hmm.
Now recently we hear in the media news about women killing their husbands. The thing is getting rampant. How do you see this dangerous trend in society now?
Is a tribute to Igbo
Yes,
womanhood.
I know.
I understand.
The title.
I'm going to get to that.
Yes.
It's a tribute to Igbo womanhood, and I come as an offspring of an Igbo woman, and to me, there are no greater sets of women in the world than Igbo women. I'm not saying they are greater than anybody else, but there is none greater than them. So that's why I set out to do a book that identifies some key Igbo women over history that have contributed to not only national building, but also in the international arena. Let me get to the question you asked about women killing their husbands. It is sort of an unfair question to women, because men kill their wives too. And we don't raise as much hell about that, right? The fact of the matter is there are more women over history, even in our communities, that could have met their death in the hands of their husband than the other way around. So the bottom line is domestic violence is wrong, period, right? Whether it is perpetrated by the man or the woman.
All right, in as much as you've just said this, and that I believe that the book has something to do with Igbo woman portrait, and you are commending the Igbo women for their way of life.
Right.
And you said something about, or from their profile, we talked about, you say something that one of your books is being handled by Nollywood.
Nollywood, yes.
Nollywood.
Yes.
So how do you see Igbo man history or activities or characters being portrayed in this our film making? Is it good the way you see it?
Well, first of all, I will commend the creativity of our brothers and sisters in Nollywood. There's no doubt that they have created something virtually out of nothing, to the point where they produce more movies now in numbers than virtually every other nation. The close competitors are India and the United States. All right. So first, let me commend the creativity. But again, like everything else, creativity can be used for different kinds of purposes. And what I find that is going on, or has gone on for quite some time in Nollywood, is a derogatory portrayal of our people, where what I call European nationalism, or, well, for most of us in Nollywood, is about European nationalism. In the northern, known as Kennywood, you may get into Arab nationalism that has crept into some of their scripts. But the portrayal of things European as superior to ours, including religion, which is a major plot in a lot of these stories, often portray our religious men and women in the Igbo religion, for instance, or what some people call African traditional religion. They portray them in bad light, and they portray the European religious activists, which is Christianity, as the saviors, as the ones that are upright and the ones that want to do the right thing, so to speak, vis-a-vis the community. I think that is beginning to change. I think you now have some writers that are putting up scripts that, while they do not necessarily put our people above others, but they don't now subscribe to the notion that everything foreign that has been brought to us or introduced to us is superior to everything else that we are doing indigenously. So I commend the efforts of Nollywood, and in fact, as a personal interest of mine, I would like to attract Nollywood away from Lagos and bring it to Imo State and Owerri. And if the governor is interested in that, we are willing to work with him to attract Nollywood away from Lagos and bring them to Imo as the headquarters. And you do that by building the infrastructure necessary to attract them. It is our boys and girls that are controlling Nollywood in Lagos. And whatever taxes are paid to Lagos state government and all of those things. And whatever business comes out of Nollywood Productions is paid to landlords and all that in Lagos. We can bring them home, and I'm sure they'll be glad to come home if the right infrastructure is provided for them here in the state.
Yes, what's the name of that book you said?
It's From the Belly of the Gods.
Good.
Yes.
So did they stumble into your book? Or
Yes. Interestingly enough, somebody bought a copy of my book somewhere in Nigeria, and they looked through the publisher to find me, and they said they want to script it into, they've already written the script into a movie. From the Belly of the Gods is actually a story about human creation, the creation of the universe from an Igbo perspective.
All right, let me still ask you a question on this. According to what you're saying, and according to history says that the civilization emanated from Africa. Why is it that our Nollywood actors doesn't want the whole world to know that we are the pioneers of civilization in the world? Because if you look at what the whites are doing, they want to subside the idea that the black nation has nothing to do with civilization. So what do you say about that?
Yeah, you remember when I said part of the issue of empire building is resource control, and the most important resource control is human resource, the mind.
Yeah.
So our European brothers, all credit to them, have done a good job with our minds, such that they don't even have to be around to get us to act in their interest. They don't have to be around us. They don't have to have whips, guns, anything. But they've gone into our minds in such a way that we now act out their scripts, so to speak, including ascribing superiority and excellence to anything that has to do with them. And so you don't blame Nollywood, most of whom came out of the same training we all got in primary and secondary school and universities, which is to look to Europe, right, for excellence and for authority in virtually everything. So you don't blame them. What needs to happen is a reorientation of the script writers and the producers in Nollywood to make them understand the full impact of the history of their people in such a way that they develop a consciousness that allows them to portray their people as the original people that they are, to portray their people as the progenitors of civilization, which is a fact, and project our value systems as more conducive to the human enterprise than the value systems we have inherited from Arabia and from Europe.
Okay. Now, I would like to know what is your advice on resource control and terrorism in Nigeria?
Well, we got to get to the table. Like I said, if terrorists, empire builders, and independent movements, so you can classify IPOB, Delta as independent movements. You can classify Boko Haram as empire builders in the sense that they want a caliphate and they want the caliphate to be governed in a particular Islamic way. To the extent that all of those activities, and then of course you have the Nigerian state itself, which is interested in the resources we're talking about, and the general ordinary people of Nigerians who are, in fact, by and large, the stakeholders in the resource control. So if you believe that resource control is at the center of all struggles, and you believe that those seeking parts of that control are rational actors, then dialogue is the preferred means to resolve issues, which means there has to be a give and take. All right? There has to be a give and take by those who think they are controlling it now, and there has to be a give and take by those who are seeking to get more of it. It is when dialogue fails, or when people refuse to get into dialogue, there is only so much you can put the people down, and they'll rise up. And it is in the best interest of nation states to make sure that equity and justice is at the forefront of their activities and the administration, so that you don't push people to the point where they say, we have nothing else to lose but to fight.
Well, on that note of dialogue, give and take, I think we've call it a day. We have talked so much on that. And therefore, our guest has been a literary giant, a security expert, Ngafibo, to say like that, Dr. Ugorji O. Dr. Ugorji, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, sir. It's been a pleasure. I enjoyed the questions, and I thank you for the honor and the privilege of being in your studios. God bless.